Did they think a crown made a woman fragile? Did they believe a queen was just a signature on a treaty, a womb for a future king? Did they ever wonder what happened when the gentle hand they expected to hold a rosary decided to hold a sword instead? What happens when piety becomes a political weapon, when motherhood becomes a reason to go to war, and when being underestimated becomes the perfect camouflage? They saw a pawn. They got a player who changed the entire game. Number 17, how did a king's daughter build forts better than any Viking? Æthelflæd, Lady of the Mercians, was not supposed to be a military commander. She was a woman who died in 918, a time when leadership was decided by the sword. Her own brother, the King of Wessex, was initially so worried about her power that he razed one of her new fortresses. Despite this, Irish annals, written by men who respected strength above all, called her the Queen of the Saxons. Æthelflæd was the daughter of Alfred the Great. That name carries weight. Alfred was the king who stopped the Viking conquest of England. He saved his kingdom, Wessex, from the great heathen army, but a huge part of England, the Danelaw, remained under Viking control. Alfred knew the fight was not over. He taught his children everything he knew. He taught his son, Edward, how to be a king. He taught his daughter, Æthelflæd, how to think like a strategist. This was unusual. A king's daughter was usually a bargaining chip, a bride to be sent off to seal an alliance. And that is what happened. Æthelflæd was married to Æthelred, the ruler of Mercia. Mercia was a kingdom neighboring Wessex. It had been battered by Viking attacks. The alliance was crucial. Æthelflæd's job was to be a loyal wife and secure the bond between the two Saxon kingdoms. Her husband was a capable warrior, but his health was failing. As he grew weaker, Æthelflæd grew stronger. She did not just sit in the background. She was co-signing charters. She was leading diplomatic missions. She was learning the land, the people, the weaknesses of her enemies. Her perceived weakness was simple. She was a woman. When her husband died around 911, Mercia was vulnerable. The lords of Mercia could have rejected her. The Vikings could have seen a land ruled by a widow as an easy target. Her own brother, King Edward of Wessex, might have tried to absorb Mercia into his own kingdom. Everyone expected her to fail or step aside. She did neither. She took the title Lady of the Mercians. It was a clever move. Not queen, which might have challenged her brother, but not duchess or countess either. Lady. It was a title of authority, unique to her. She used the loyalty she had built over the years. The Mercian lords did not see the king's sister from Wessex. They saw their leader, the woman who had governed alongside her husband, and knew their struggles. This is where she turned her weakness into a weapon. The Vikings underestimated her. They saw a woman in charge and prepared to attack. They did not realize she had spent years studying her father's defensive strategies. Alfred the Great's big idea was the burh, a fortified town. These were defensive structures meant to protect people. Æthelflæd took that idea and made it offensive. She began a systematic campaign of fortress building. These were not just walls, they were strategic positions. She built a fort at Bremesbyrig in 910 to block a Viking route. She built one at Skargeit in 912. She built another at Bridnorth right on the river Severn to control the waterway. Each fort was a dagger pointed at the Danelaw. Each one was a base for an army, a safe haven for her people, and a stone in the wall of a new unified England. Between 910 and 918, she built at least 10 of these fortresses. Think about that. In 8 years, she planned, supplied, and constructed 10 military bases in hostile territory. This was a massive logistical undertaking. It required engineering skill, resource management, and a deep understanding of military geography. Her brother Edward was doing the same in the south. Together, they created a pincer movement. In 917, the war reached its peak. Æthelflæd saw an opportunity. The Viking army at Derby was a major threat. It was one of the 5 key fortified towns of the Danelaw. Taking it would be a huge blow to Viking power. She did not wait for her brother. She led the Mercian army herself. The battle for Derby was fierce. The town's defenses were strong, but Æthelflæd's forces broke through. She captured the town, a victory that sent shockwaves through the Danelaw. The next year, in 918, she moved on Leicester. This time, there was no battle. The Viking army there saw what happened at Derby. They saw the network of forts closing in on them. They saw a commander who was relentless and methodical. They surrendered to her without a fight. Shortly after, even the leaders of the Viking kingdom of York, the most powerful Viking state in England, sent her pledges of loyalty. They offered to accept her as their overlord. They feared her more than they feared other Viking kings. She died just a few weeks later. She had pushed herself to the limit. Her brother Edward quickly moved in and took control of Mercia, absorbing it into his kingdom. He even took her only daughter, Æthelflæd, and sent her to a nunnery, erasing her from the line of succession. He was likely afraid. He knew how powerful his sister had become. Æthelflæd, the woman who was supposed to be a political pawn, had become a conqueror. She used the low expectations placed upon her to work in the shadows, build her power base, and then strike with devastating precision. She did not just defend her land, she took the fight to the enemy and won. Number 16. Could a foreign widow unite a kingdom of warriors? Olga of Kyiv was born around the year 900. When she was just a teenager, she married Igor, the ruler of the Kievan Rus. This was a land of fierce Slavic and Norse warriors. She was regent for her son when he was only 3 years old. A neighboring tribe, the Drevlians, believed they could force her into marriage with their prince, effectively seizing her kingdom. Olga's story begins with loss. Her husband Igor was the ruler of the Rus. He was a warrior king, but he was also greedy. He went to the Drevlian tribe to collect tribute. He took what he was owed, left, and then, on the way home, decided it was not enough. He went back for more with only a small guard. The Drevlians were furious. They captured him and killed him in a brutal manner. The news reached Kyiv. Igor was dead. His heir, Sviatoslav, was a toddler. Olga was a grieving widow. The Drevlians saw their chance. They sent a delegation of their 20 best men to Kyiv. Their proposal was an ultimatum disguised as a marriage offer. Their prince would marry Olga. He would become the ruler of Kyiv. Sviatoslav would be pushed aside. The Drevlians would be in charge. This was Olga's moment of supreme weakness. She was a woman, a foreigner in a land of warriors, and a regent for a child. The Drevlians assumed she would be terrified. They expected her to be weak and pliable. They thought she had no choice but to accept their offer to save herself and her son. Olga met the Drevlian envoys. She listened to their proposal. Then she put on a mask of acceptance. She told them she was honored. She said she could not refuse such a great prince, but she said she wanted to honor them properly. She told them to go back to their boats and wait. The next day, her people would carry them in their boats through the city. It would be a great spectacle to show the people of Kyiv their importance. The Drevlians were pleased. Their pride was stroked. They agreed. The next day, they were carried in their boat into Olga's court. But they were not carried to a feast. They were carried to a deep trench that had been dug overnight on Olga's orders. The boat, with the 20 envoys still in it, was thrown into the trench. Olga leaned over the edge and watched as her soldiers buried them alive. She was just getting started. She sent a message back to the Drevlian prince. She said she accepted his proposal. But she needed a delegation of the most distinguished Drevlian nobles to escort her to his capital. Without them, she said, her people in Kyiv would not let her go. The Drevlians, who had not heard from their first envoys, assumed all was well. They were flattered. They sent a party of their best chieftains and nobles. When they arrived, Olga greeted them warmly. She told them to refresh themselves in the bathhouse after their long journey. The Drevlian nobles went inside. Olga's soldiers barred the doors from the outside and set the building on fire. Still, her revenge was not complete. She sent another message to the Drevlians. She was on her way, she said. But first, she needed to hold a funeral feast in their capital city, Iskarostan, to mourn her husband at his grave. She asked them to prepare great quantities of mead. The Drevlians, still unaware of the fate of their two delegations, agreed. They were likely confused, but the prospect of finalizing the union with Kyiv was too tempting. Olga arrived with a small retinue. She wept at her husband's tomb. Then the feast began. The Drevlians drank heavily. Olga's soldiers served them, but did not drink themselves. When the Drevlians were drunk and helpless, Olga gave a signal. Her soldiers drew their swords. They killed 5,000 Drevlians that day. The survivors fled back to their city. Olga and her army laid siege to Iskorostan. The siege lasted for a year. The city would not fall. The Drevlians were desperate but resilient. Olga realized a direct assault was too costly. So she used her mind again. She sent a message to the people of the city. She said she had had her revenge. She was tired of war. All she wanted was a small tribute to show their submission. She asked for 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from each house. The Drevlians were overjoyed. It was a tiny price to pay for peace. They gathered the birds and sent them to Olga. That night, Olga told her soldiers to attach a piece of sulfur bound with cloth to each bird's leg. At dusk, they lit the sulfur and released the birds. The pigeons and sparrows flew back to their nests in the houses, barns, and thatched roofs of Iskorostan. The entire city went up in flames at once. As the people fled the burning city, Olga's army was waiting for them. Olga of Kyiv used the Drevlians' perception of her as a weak, grieving woman to lure them into a series of traps. Each step was carefully calculated. She dismantled their leadership, then their army, then their city. She was not just getting revenge. She was sending a message to every other tribe that might think of challenging Kyiv. She was securing the throne for her son. After this, she ruled as regent for years, reforming the system of tribute collection so that it was fair and systematic, preventing the kind of greed that got her husband killed. She was a brutal tactician, but also a clever administrator. She used her supposed weakness to achieve a level of dominance her husband never could. Number 15 was being underestimated, the most powerful weapon in a queen's arsenal. Theodora, Empress of the Byzantine Empire, was never meant to rule. She was born around 500 AD into the lowest class of society. Her father was a bearkeeper for the Hippodrome in Constantinople. She and her sisters were actresses, a profession considered scandalous and immoral at the time. Yet, she became one of the most powerful women in the history of the empire, a co-ruler with her husband Justinian I. Theodora's weakness was her past. It was a past her enemies never let her forget. They called her a commoner, a performer of indecent plays. In the rigid social hierarchy of Byzantium, this was an unbridgeable gap. A woman like that could never be empress. But Justinian, the heir to the throne, fell deeply in love with her. He saw her intelligence, her charisma, and her strength. He was so determined to marry her that he had his uncle, the Emperor Justin I, change the law that forbade senators from marrying actresses. When Justinian became emperor in 527, Theodora was crowned empress beside him. Many in the court were horrified. They saw her as a disgrace. They whispered about her past. They assumed she would be a silent, decorative figure, a symbol of the emperor's poor judgment. They underestimated her profoundly. Her past, the very thing that was supposed to be her weakness, was actually her greatest strength. She had not grown up sheltered in a palace. She had grown up on the streets. She knew how ordinary people thought. She understood their struggles, their fears, and their loyalties. The aristocrats in the court lived in a bubble. Theodora had lived in the real world. This gave her an insight that Justinian, who had been groomed for power his whole life, lacked. This became clear during the Nika riots in 532. This was the most serious crisis of Justinian's reign. A dispute between rival chariot racing factions, the Blues and the Greens, escalated into a full-blown insurrection against the government. The city was on fire. The mob proclaimed a new emperor. Justinian's generals were losing control. His advisors told him to flee. The ships were ready. His life was in danger. Justinian was about to give the order to evacuate the palace. He was ready to abandon his city and his throne. Then Theodora stood up. She spoke to the council. She told them that this was not the time to run. She said that she would not go. She said that royalty was a fine burial shroud. It was a powerful, defiant speech. She reminded them what was at stake. She shamed them for their cowardice. Her words changed everything. They gave Justinian and his generals the courage to fight back. The general Belisarius took his troops to the Hippodrome, where the rioters were gathered, and suppressed the rebellion. Tens of thousands of people were killed, but the throne was saved. Justinian would have lost his empire if not for Theodora. Her courage, born from a life where she had to fight for everything, was stronger than that of the men who had been born to rule. Theodora was not just a source of courage, she was an active co-ruler. Justinian passed laws that called her his partner in my deliberations. She took a special interest in laws affecting women. She pushed for legislation that gave women more rights in divorce, that prohibited forced prostitution, and that created a convent where former prostitutes could live in safety. She was using her power to protect women who were in the same vulnerable position she had once been in. Her past gave her a sense of empathy and justice that the rest of the court could not comprehend. She also played a major role in the empire's religious politics. Justinian was a devout Chalcedonian Christian. Theodora, however, was sympathetic to the Monophysites, a group considered heretical by the state church. The Monophysites were strong in the eastern provinces of Egypt and Syria. Justinian's persecution of them was causing instability. Theodora used her influence to protect Monophysite leaders. She hid them in her own palaces. She worked behind the scenes to moderate Justinian's policies. Her enemies saw this as treachery. They thought she was undermining the emperor and the church. But Theodora was playing a longer game. She understood that the empire needed the loyalty of its eastern provinces. Her quiet protection of the Monophysites acted as a safety valve. It kept these crucial regions from breaking away entirely. She was a political realist. Her heretical sympathies, another perceived weakness, were actually a tool she used to hold the diverse and fragile empire together. She used her low-born past, her courage, and her unorthodox beliefs to dominate the political landscape of one of the world's greatest empires. Number 14. How does a queen fight a war when her own son is her enemy? Melisende, Queen of Jerusalem, was born into a world of conflict. She was the eldest daughter of King Baldwin II of Jerusalem, a crusader kingdom surrounded by enemies. Baldwin had no sons. In Europe, this might have meant the throne would pass to a distant male relative. But in the precarious kingdom of Jerusalem, things were different. Baldwin named Melisende his heir. He ruled until his death in 1131. The men of the kingdom did not want a woman to rule alone. She was forced to marry. Her husband, Fulk of Anjou, was a powerful and ambitious European noble. Melisende's weakness was twofold. She was a woman in a kingdom that valued warrior kings above all else, and she was married to a man who believed he should be the sole ruler. Fulk arrived in Jerusalem and immediately tried to sideline her. He ignored her authority. He promoted his own followers from Anjou and pushed aside the native Jerusalem nobility who were loyal to Melisende. He expected her to be a typical queen consort, to manage the household and produce an heir. He did not understand who she was. Melisende was not just any princess. She was the daughter of Baldwin II. She had grown up in the political cauldron of the Crusader states. She knew the people, the politics, and the dangers in a way Fulk never could. She had the loyalty of the local barons. She was not going to give up her birthright. The conflict between them grew. Fulk accused Melisende of having an affair with one of the most powerful local lords, Hugh II of Le Puiset. It was a political move, an attempt to discredit her and her supporters. It backfired. The accusation created a political crisis that rallied the Jerusalem nobility around Melisende. They saw Fulk as an arrogant outsider trying to seize power. The situation escalated to the point of a civil war. In the end, there was a public reconciliation. But the terms of that reconciliation were a total victory for Melisende, as Fulk was forced to accept her as his equal and co-ruler. From that point on, he did nothing without her knowledge and consent. She had faced down her own husband and won. After Fulk died in a hunting accident in 1143, Melisende's challenges were not over. Her son, Baldwin III, was now the king. But he was only 13. Melisende ruled as his regent. This was a conventional role. But when Baldwin came of age at 15, he expected to rule alone. Melisende had no intention of stepping down. She had ruled the kingdom effectively for years. She believed her son was too young and inexperienced. This created a new conflict, this time between mother and son. Baldwin III demanded his coronation as sole ruler. Melisende delayed. The tension grew until 1152, when Baldwin went before the High Court of Jerusalem. He demanded they divide the kingdom. The court, full of nobles who respected Melisende, granted his request. Baldwin was given the northern part of the kingdom, the cities of Acre and Tyre. Melisende kept the richer south, including the holy city of Jerusalem itself and Nablus. It was a strange solution, and it did not last. Baldwin was not satisfied. He felt his mother had kept the better part of the kingdom. A few weeks later, he launched a surprise invasion of his mother's territory. He marched on Jerusalem. Melisende was caught off guard, but she did not surrender. She and her supporters fortified themselves in the Tower of David, the city's citadel. For several days, a son besieged his own mother. It was a shocking event. The church intervened. A settlement was negotiated. Melisende was forced to surrender Jerusalem. She was given the city of Nablus and its surrounding lands to rule for the rest of her life. It looked like a defeat. She had lost the capital. But the story doesn't end there. Baldwin III soon realized that ruling was harder than he thought. He was a good military commander, but he lacked his mother's political and diplomatic skills. He found himself relying on her advice more and more. Within a few years, Melisende was back at the center of power, not as a ruler, but as a trusted advisor. Her name started appearing on official documents again, alongside her sons. She had lost the battle, but she had not lost her influence. She had proven that she was indispensable. Melisende used her deep roots in the kingdom and the loyalty of her subjects to outmaneuver both her husband and her son. She was expected to be a consort, then a temporary regent. Instead, she ruled for over 2 decades. She was a great patron of the arts in the church, commissioning the famous Melisende Psalter. She proved that a woman could rule the warrior kingdom of Jerusalem as effectively as any man. Number 13, what if a queen's piety was her sharpest political tool? Jadwiga of Poland was crowned in 1384. She was 10 years old. The Polish nobles, wanting to avoid a foreign king ruling them, insisted she be crowned not as queen, but as king. Her official title was Hedwig Rex Polonii, Jadwiga, King of Poland. This was done to emphasize that she was the monarch in her own right, not just a king's wife. She was so devout that she often prayed for hours on a stone floor and was later made a saint by the Catholic Church. Jadwiga's weakness was her age and her gender. She was a child, a girl in a world of powerful, ambitious men. She was also betrothed to William of Habsburg, a German prince. The Polish nobles did not want a German influencing their kingdom. They had other plans. They wanted Jadwiga to marry Jogaila, the Grand Duke of Lithuania. Lithuania was the last pagan nation in Europe. A marriage would mean Jogaila's conversion to Christianity and the union of Poland and Lithuania into a massive, powerful state. This was a heavy burden for a young girl. She was in love with William, the boy she had grown up expecting to marry. Now, she was being told she had to break that engagement and marry a man she had never met, a man from a pagan land that Poles considered wild and dangerous. She was being asked to sacrifice her personal happiness for the good of the state. Jadwiga resisted. There is a story that William came to Krakow to see her. Jadwiga, locked in her chambers in Wawel Castle, was so distraught that she grabbed an axe to chop down the door to go to him. It was only the words of a wise advisor that calmed her down. He reminded her of her duty to her people and to God. This is where Jadwiga turned her perceived weakness, her gentle piety, into a source of incredible strength. She was deeply religious. She came to see the marriage to Jogaila not as a political maneuver, but as a holy mission. By marrying him, she could bring Christianity to Lithuania. She could save countless souls. This reframed the entire situation. It was not a sacrifice of her happiness. It was the fulfillment of her divine purpose. Her piety was not just an internal motivation. It became her public persona and her greatest political asset. In a deeply religious age, her devotion gave her an authority that her age and gender would have otherwise denied her. She was seen as pure, wise, and guided by God. The Polish nobles, who might have tried to manipulate a different child monarch, respected and even feared her moral authority. She married Jogaila, who was baptized and took the name Ladislaw to Jagiello. The Polish-Lithuanian Union was formed. It created one of the largest states in Europe. Jadwiga was not content to be a passive queen. She was an active partner in the rule of this new commonwealth. She founded a college at the University of Krakow to educate Lithuanians. She sponsored hospitals and churches. She also used her piety in diplomacy. The Teutonic Knights, a powerful German military order on Poland's border, were a constant threat. Their entire reason for being was to fight pagans. With Lithuania's conversion, their justification for attacking the region was gone. But they continued to raid and cause trouble. In 1397, Jadwiga met with the Grand Master of the Teutonic Knights. The knights were known for their arrogance and military power. They likely expected to deal with a soft, submissive queen. Instead, they met a monarch whose authority came from God. She did not threaten them with armies. She challenged them on moral and religious grounds. She spoke to them about justice, faith, and their duty as Christians. Her arguments were so powerful and her moral standing so high that she was able to negotiate a peaceful resolution. She shamed them into compliance. Jadwiga was also known for her charity. There are many stories about her helping the poor. One famous legend tells of how a stone left an imprint of her foot when she gave a poor stonemason a piece of gold from her shoe. Whether the stories are true or not, they show the power of her reputation. Her people loved her. They saw her as a saint on earth. This love gave her immense political capital. No noble would dare to cross a queen so beloved by the common people. Jadwiga died in 1399 at the age of 25, shortly after giving birth to a daughter who also died. Her reign was short, but her impact was enormous. The girl who was supposed to be a puppet monarch used her deep faith to make one of the most difficult decisions in Polish history. She then used that same faith as a shield and a sword, commanding respect, uniting two nations, and taming her enemies, not with force, but with an unshakable moral authority. Number 12, how did a foreign regent tame a nation of rebellious barons? Blanche of Castile was a Spanish princess married to the future King Louis V of France in the year 1200. The marriage was a political deal brokered by her grandmother, the formidable Eleanor of Aquitaine. When Louis V died in 1226, their son, Louis II, was only 12 years old. Blanche was named regent. A foreign woman ruling France was almost unheard of. The powerful French barons immediately saw an opportunity to reclaim the power they had lost under a strong monarchy. Blanche's weaknesses were glaring. She was a foreigner, a Spaniard in the French court. She was a woman in a system that favored male leadership. And she was a regent holding power only temporarily on behalf of her young son. The great barons of France, men like Peter of Dreux and Theobald of Champagne, formed a coalition against her. Saw her as a weak link, an easy obstacle to push aside. They expected her to be overwhelmed by the complexities of French politics and the threat of civil war. The barons launched their rebellion almost immediately. They felt that a woman could not possibly command the loyalty of an army or the respect of the court. They underestimated her character. Blanche was intelligent, determined, and utterly ruthless when she needed to be. She had learned politics at one of the most sophisticated courts in Europe. She first used diplomacy to break the rebel coalition. She knew the barons did not trust each other. They were united only by their ambition. She targeted the weakest link, Theobald of Champagne. There were rumors that Theobald was in love with Blanche. Whether true or not, Blanche used it. She played on his vanity, his ambition, and his jealousy of the other barons. She offered him favor and power if he returned to the king's side. He abandoned the rebellion, leaving the other conspirators in a much weaker position. She had broken their alliance without a single battle, but she was not afraid to use force. When the remaining rebels continued to defy her, she acted decisively. She raised the royal army and marched with her young son Louis at her side. She made a point of having the king present whenever possible. This was a brilliant move. It reminded everyone that she was not ruling for herself. She was protecting the rightful king. To rebel against her was to commit treason against the crowned monarch of France, who was just a child. It was a powerful piece of political theater. There is a famous story from this period. Blanche and the young king were trapped in the castle of Montlhéry by rebellious lords. They could not get back to Paris safely. Blanche sent a message to the people of Paris. She appealed to their loyalty to the crown. The citizens of Paris, the merchants and the craftsmen, marched out of the city in force. They lined the road from Montlhéry to Paris, armed with whatever they had, to escort their king and his mother home safely. Blanche had bypassed the treacherous nobility and appealed directly to the people. She was building a new power base for the monarchy. Blanche also faced a threat from England. King Henry III saw the regency as a chance to win back the French territories the English had lost. He allied with the rebellious French barons. In 1230, he invaded. Blanche's response was swift and strategic. She did not panic. She had spent years strengthening the royal finances. She had a well-funded army ready. She also used her diplomatic skills to ensure that most of the French nobles remained loyal. The English invasion fizzled out. Henry III achieved nothing and was forced to retreat. Blanche ruled as regent for 8 years. In that time, she defeated multiple baronial revolts, repelled a foreign invasion, and secured the throne for her son. She did not just maintain the status quo, she strengthened the power of the French monarchy significantly. When Louis the North came of age, she handed him a kingdom that was more stable, more powerful, and more centralized than the one she had inherited. Her work was not done. When Louis IX went on crusade in 1248, he left his mother, now in her 60s, as regent of France once again. She ruled wisely for another 4 years until her death. Blanche of Castile was the ultimate political operator. She took the weaknesses of being a foreign female regent and turned them into strengths. She used the loyalty owed to her son as a shield. She used her intelligence to divide her enemies, and she used her sheer force of will to crush anyone who stood in her way. The barons who thought they could topple a weak woman ended up being the ones who were broken. Number 11, can a queen without a kingdom still command an army? Margaret of Anjou was Queen of England, wife of Henry VI. She was French, married into the English court in 1445 near the end of the 100 Years' War. The marriage was meant to bring peace, but it was deeply unpopular. Many in England saw her as a symbol of their defeat in France. Her husband, Henry VI, suffered from recurring bouts of mental illness, leaving him incapable of ruling. This created a power vacuum that Margaret was forced to fill. Margaret's primary weakness was that she was a French woman in England during a time of intense anti-French sentiment. She was also a queen consort, not a ruler in her own right. Her power was entirely dependent on her husband's authority, and her husband was often mentally absent. As the political situation in England deteriorated into factionalism, her enemies, led by the ambitious Richard, Duke of York, painted her as a manipulative foreign woman who was controlling the weak king for her own purposes. They called her the She-Wolf of France. The situation exploded into the Wars of the Roses, a brutal civil war between two branches of the royal family, the House of Lancaster represented by Henry and Margaret, and the House of York led by Richard. In 1460, the Yorkists captured King Henry at the Battle of Northampton. They took him to London and forced him to sign a document, the Act of Accord, which disinherited his own son, Edward of Westminster, and named Richard of York as his heir. This was Margaret's lowest point. Her husband was a prisoner. Her son was declared illegitimate. The Yorkists controlled the government. She had no crown, no capital, and no army. Most people would have fled or surrendered. Margaret did not. Her weakness as a mother, her fierce protective instinct for her son's birthright, became her driving force. She refused to accept the Act of Accord. She saw it as an illegal theft of her son's inheritance. She fled to Scotland. There she used her skills as a diplomat, the very skills that a queen consort was supposed to possess. She negotiated for Scottish aid. She promised the Scots the town of Berwick-upon-Tweed in exchange for military support. She then traveled to the north of England, a region still loyal to the House of Lancaster. She was a queen without a kingdom, but she still had her name, her royal title, and her unshakable determination. She rallied the Lancastrian lords. She reminded them of their oaths to King Henry and his son. Her passion and energy were infectious. While the Duke of York sat comfortably in London, Margaret was on the road, on horseback, gathering an army. She was not a general who stayed in a tent. She was a leader who inspired men to fight for her and her son's cause. In late 1460, she had assembled a massive Lancastrian army. They met the Duke of York's forces at the Battle of Wakefield. York, overconfident and underestimating the army a mere woman had raised, left the safety of his castle. The Lancastrian army crushed him. Richard of York was killed in the battle. His head, along with those of his son and another leading Yorkist, was put on a pike over the gates of the city of York, adorned with a paper crown. Margaret had achieved a stunning victory. She had gone from a powerless refugee to the leader of a triumphant army. She then marched south towards London, her army swelling with new recruits. She defeated the Yorkists again at the Second Battle of St. Albans and freed her husband, King Henry. It seemed she was on the verge of total victory, but her success was also her undoing. The northern army she had raised was feared in the south. They had a reputation for plundering. The city of London, fearing the Lancastrian army, barred its gates to her. While Margaret hesitated, the Duke of York's eldest son, Edward, a brilliant military commander, gathered the remnants of the Yorkist forces and seized the capital. He was proclaimed King Edward IV. Margaret was forced to retreat. At the bloody Battle of Towton in 1461, the Lancastrian army was decisively defeated. Margaret and her son fled again, first to Scotland, then to France. For the next decade, she lived as an exile, tirelessly trying to raise support for her cause. She never gave up. She eventually forged an unlikely alliance with her former enemy, the Earl of Warwick, and briefly restored her husband to the throne in 1470. The restoration was short-lived. Edward IV returned from exile and defeated the Lancastrians for good at the battles of Barnet and Tewkesbury in 1471. Margaret's son, Edward of Westminster, was killed. Margaret herself was captured and imprisoned in the Tower of London. Although she ultimately lost the war, Margaret of Anjou's story is a remarkable example of domination through sheer will. Stripped of everything, she used her weaknesses, her foreignness, to forge continental alliances, and her motherhood to inspire a fanatical defense of her son's claim to raise armies and challenge the most powerful men in England. For a time, the She-Wolf of France was the most feared and effective leader in the kingdom. Number 10. What happens when a she-wolf is pushed too far? Isabella of France, daughter of the powerful King Philip IV of France, was married to King Edward II of England in 1308. She was 12 years old. The marriage was a political alliance meant to ease tensions between the two kingdoms. Isabella was beautiful, intelligent, and from a formidable royal family. She was expected to be a dutiful wife and queen. But her husband, Edward II, had little interest in her. His attention was focused on his male favorites, first Piers Gaveston and later Hugh Despencer and his father. Isabella's weakness was her position as a neglected and humiliated queen. Edward II openly lavished affection, titles, and wealth on his favorites, often at Isabella's expense. He gave Gaveston jewels that were part of Isabella's own dowry. This was not just a personal slight, it was a public undermining of her royal status. For years, Isabella endured it. She performed her duties. She gave Edward a male heir, the future Edward III. She tried to be a peacemaker between her husband and the English barons who hated the king's favorites. But the situation grew worse with the rise of the Despencers. They were even more ambitious and greedy than Gaveston had been. They accumulated vast amounts of land and power, alienating the entire English nobility. They also seemed to have a particular dislike for Isabella. They convinced the king to remove her household staff and place her under a form of house arrest. In 1324, when war broke out again between England and France, Edward II, on the advice of the Despencers, seized all of Isabella's lands and properties in England, claiming she was a security risk because she was French. This was the final straw. They had taken her dignity, her influence, and now her financial independence. They had made her powerless. They thought they had her trapped, but they had given her an opportunity. In 1325, Isabella was sent to France to negotiate a peace treaty with her brother, King Charles IV. It was a massive miscalculation by Edward and the Despencers. They thought sending her to her own family would make her more compliant. Instead, it set her free. Once in France, Isabella refused to come back. She publicly denounced Hugh Despencer. She stated that she would not return to England until he was removed from power. She used her position as the wronged wife and queen to gather support. In the French court, she was not the neglected wife of a weak king. She was the sister of the French monarch. She was a symbol of resistance to the tyranny of the dispensers. In Paris, she found a powerful ally, Roger Mortimer, an English baron who had been imprisoned by Edward II but had escaped to France. He was a sworn enemy of the dispensers. He and Isabella became leaders of a growing community of English exiles who wanted to overthrow the dispensers and Edward II. Isabella was no longer just a diplomat. She was a revolutionary. She used her weakness as a spurned woman to build a powerful narrative. She was not invading. She was returning to save the kingdom from corrupt advisors and to restore her own rights and the rights of her son. She arranged a betrothal between her son, the young Edward, and the daughter of the powerful Count of Hainaut in the Low Countries. The dowry for this marriage was an army. In September 1326, Isabella and Mortimer landed in England with a small mercenary force. Her weakness was now her greatest propaganda tool. The people of England did not see a foreign invader. They saw their queen, who had been unjustly treated, returning to reclaim her rightful place. The country rose to support her. The powerful barons who hated the dispensers flocked to her banner. King Edward's support completely collapsed. No one wanted to fight for him or his hated favorites. The invasion was almost bloodless. The dispensers were captured and executed. Edward II fled, but was eventually captured. He was forced to abdicate the throne in favor of his son, who was crowned King Edward III. Isabella and Mortimer ruled as regents. Isabella of France had achieved the unthinkable. The queen who had been stripped of her lands and dignity had returned and conquered the kingdom. She used the humiliation and disrespect shown to her as a cause for war. She turned her personal grievances into a national crusade. And the barons and the people who might have resisted a male claimant rallied behind the sympathetic figure of the wronged queen. She was called the She-Wolf of France by her enemies, a name meant to be an insult, but she had shown them that a she-wolf, when cornered, is a very dangerous animal indeed. Number 9, could a female ruler outfight the Holy Roman Emperor? Matilda of Tuscany was one of the most powerful rulers of the 11th century. She was born in 1046 into the House of Canossa, which controlled a vast and strategic territory in northern Italy. Her lands lay between the Holy Roman Empire to the north and the Papal States to the south. When her father and brother died, she inherited these lands, becoming a countess in her own right. For nearly 40 years, she was a major player in the investiture controversy, the great struggle for power between the papacy and the Holy Roman Empire. Matilda's weakness was obvious. She was a woman trying to rule a large feudal state in a violent age. Warfare, politics, and land ownership were a man's world. A female ruler was seen as an anomaly, a temporary placeholder until a suitable husband could be found to rule in her name. Her own husband, Godfrey the Hunchback, tried to do just that, attempting to claim her lands for himself. Matilda left him and returned to Italy to rule on her own. Her enemies, especially the Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV, saw her as an obstacle that could be easily brushed aside. They were wrong. Matilda was not just a countess, she was a warrior. She was a staunch supporter of the papacy, particularly of Pope Gregory VII and his reforms. This put her in direct opposition to Emperor Henry IV, who believed he had the right to appoint bishops and popes. The conflict between the two men would define the era, and Matilda was right in the middle of it. Her lands became the main battleground. Henry IV invaded Italy multiple times to depose the Pope and crush his supporters. His primary target in Italy was Matilda. He expected to march through her territory with ease. He did not anticipate that Matilda would personally lead her own armies into battle against him. She was a brilliant military strategist. She knew her mountainous terrain intimately. She used guerrilla tactics, ambushes, and strategic retreats to harass and exhaust the larger imperial armies. She commanded the loyalty of her vassals and the people of her cities. They fought for her not just out of feudal obligation, but out of genuine respect for her leadership and her piety. The most famous event of the era took place at her castle of Canossa in the winter of 1077. Pope Gregory VII had excommunicated Emperor Henry IV. This was a devastating blow, as it released all of Henry's subjects from their oaths of loyalty. Facing a rebellion in Germany, Henry had to beg the Pope for forgiveness. He crossed the Alps in the dead of winter and came to Canossa, where the Pope was staying as Matilda's guest. For 3 days, the emperor stood barefoot in the snow outside the castle gates, dressed as a penitent, begging for absolution. This event is known as the Walk to Canossa. It was a huge political victory for the papacy, but it is important to remember where it happened at Matilda's castle under her protection. The most powerful man in Europe was forced to humble himself before the Pope, and he could only do so because Matilda of Tuscany was strong enough to guarantee the Pope's safety from the emperor's army. She was the one holding the power. Henry IV never forgave her for this humiliation. The war continued for decades. Henry invaded her lands again and again. He captured some of her cities. He declared her lands forfeit, but he could never defeat her. She would always retreat, regroup, and fight back. In 1092, at the Battle of Canossa, a different event from the Walk to Canossa, Matilda's smaller force lured the imperial army into a trap and won a stunning victory. It was a humiliating defeat for Henry IV, and it broke the back of his power in Italy. He was forced to retreat back to Germany. As Matilda of Tuscany ruled for over 30 years. She never remarried for love or allowed a man to control her. Her second marriage was a purely political alliance with a teenage duke, which she soon ended. She commanded armies, built churches, and corresponded with popes and kings. She used the emperor's underestimation of her to her advantage. He never took her military threat seriously until it was too late. She proved that a woman could not only rule a feudal state, but could also be one of the most successful military commanders of her age. Number 8, what if your greatest weakness was your own family? Urraca of Leon and Castile was born in 1081, the eldest daughter of King Alfonso VI. Her father had a son, Sancho, but he was killed in battle. This left Urraca as the heir to the largest kingdom in Christian Spain. This was a highly unusual situation. The kingdoms of Leon and Castile were on the front line of the Reconquista, the long war against the Muslim states of the south. It was a land that expected a warrior king. When Alfonso VI died in 1109, Urraca became the first queen regnant in European history. Her weakness was the legitimacy of her rule. The nobility was not comfortable with a woman in charge. To secure her position, her father had arranged for her to marry Alfonso I of Aragon, a renowned warrior known as the Battler. The idea was that he would provide the military leadership the kingdom needed. The marriage was a disaster. Alfonso the Battler was not interested in being a prince consort. He wanted to be the king of Castile and Leon in his own right. He was arrogant, dismissive of Urraca's authority, and violent. He believed that as her husband, he had complete control over her and her kingdom. He installed his own Aragonese nobles in Castilian castles and ignored Urraca's own vassals. Urraca was a proud and capable ruler. She had been groomed for power by her father. She was not going to let her kingdom be taken over by her abusive husband. She separated from him. This act was almost unheard of for a queen in the 12th century. It plunged the kingdom into a brutal civil war. Urraca was fighting on multiple fronts. She was fighting her husband Alfonso of Aragon. She was fighting her own half-sister Teresa, who was trying to carve out an independent kingdom in Portugal. And soon, she was even fighting her own son. Her son, the future Alfonso VII, was a child when she became queen. He had been raised in Galicia by powerful nobles who saw him as a way to increase their own power. They declared the young Alfonso king of Galicia in direct defiance of his mother's authority. Urraca was now at war with the 3 most important men in her life: her husband, her son, and her sister's husband. This was her ultimate weakness. Her power was being challenged not by foreign enemies, but from within her own family. Her enemies used her gender against her, portraying her as an unfit, wanton woman who could not control her kingdom or her family. They expected her to be crushed between these powerful male relatives. Urraca was a brilliant political survivor. She used diplomacy as her primary weapon. She formed and broke alliances with breathtaking speed. She would ally with her son's supporters to fight her husband. And then she would negotiate a truce with her husband to deal with a rebellion from one of her own nobles. She was constantly on the move, leading her armies, besieging castles, and holding court. She was also a master of propaganda. She presented herself as the rightful heir of her father, the protector of the kingdom against the ambitions of the Aragonese foreigner. She cultivated the loyalty of the powerful bishops and the rising towns, who saw her as a better guarantor of their rights than the warlike Alfonso of Aragon or the factious nobles. For years, she fought to hold her kingdom together. She was captured by her husband at one point, but managed to escape. She besieged her son in a castle, and he besieged her in another. It was a messy, brutal, and deeply personal series of conflicts. But in the end, she won. She managed to get her marriage to Alfonso the Battler annulled by the Pope. This removed his legal claim to her throne. She forced him out of Castile and Leon. She also managed to reassert her authority over her son, bringing Galicia back under her control, though the relationship remained tense. She successfully defended her borders against her sister in Portugal. Urraca died in 1126. She had reigned for 17 years. She had inherited a kingdom on the verge of chaos and held it together through sheer force of will. She faced down her husband, her son, and her nobles, all of whom thought a woman was an easy target. She used her political intelligence to play her enemies against each other until she was the only one left standing. She was not just a survivor, she was a ruler who dominated a political scene that was designed to destroy her. Number 7. Could a queen's love for her son also be her path to power? Caterina Sforza was an Italian noblewoman of the Renaissance, the illegitimate daughter of the Duke of Milan. She was born in 1463 into the violent world of Italian city-state politics. She was famous for her beauty, but also for her courage and her ruthless nature. She was married to Girolamo Riario, the Lord of Imola and Forli, a nephew of the Pope. He was a cruel and unpopular ruler. In 1488, he was assassinated by his enemies in the city of Forli. Caterina and her 6 young children were taken prisoner. The conspirators seized control of the city, but the city's main fortress, the Rocca di Ravaldino, remained loyal to her. The Castellan refused to surrender. The conspirators thought they had the ultimate bargaining chip, Caterina's children. They told her to order the Castellan to surrender, or they would kill her children in front of her. This was Caterina's moment of weakness. She was a captured widow. Her only power lay in the loyalty of a single soldier in a single fortress. Her enemies were using the most powerful weapon they had against her, her love for her children. They expected her to break. Caterina asked the conspirators to let her go into the fortress to persuade the Castellan to surrender. They were suspicious, but she argued that he would not listen to a verbal order. He needed to see her. To ensure she would return, they kept her children as hostages. They let her go. Once inside the fortress, Caterina's demeanor changed. She ordered the garrison to prepare for a siege. She went up to the battlements to face the conspirators. They were furious. They dragged her children to the walls of the fortress and threatened again to kill them. What Caterina did next became a legend. According to the story, she lifted her skirts to expose her private parts and shouted at them that she had the means to make more children. It was a shocking, defiant act. She was turning their threat back on them. She was telling them that their leverage was meaningless. She was willing to sacrifice her children for her power and her family's legacy. Whether the gesture happened exactly as described is debated by historians, but the message was clear. Caterina Sforza would not be blackmailed. The conspirators were stunned. They did not kill the children, perhaps realizing that doing so would only turn the entire region against them. Caterina held the fortress. Soon her uncle, Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan, sent an army to relieve her. The conspiracy collapsed. Caterina was restored to power, ruling Forli and Imola as regent for her young son, Ottaviano. She had faced the ultimate test and had not flinched. She had used her enemies' perception of her as a mother against them. They thought a mother's love was a weakness they could exploit. She showed them it was a source of unyielding, brutal strength. She would do anything to protect her son's inheritance, even if it meant sacrificing her other children. Katerina ruled for over a decade. She was a capable but harsh ruler. She lowered taxes, but she also dealt with plots ruthlessly. She married twice more, both times to men she chose for political and personal reasons. She commanded her own soldiers and took a keen interest in military technology and chemistry. Her biggest test came in 1499, when Cesare Borgia, the son of Pope Alexander VI, launched a campaign to conquer the region. He marched on her cities with a powerful French-backed army. One by one, the towns of Italy fell to Borgia. Many rulers fled or surrendered. Caterina refused. She sent her children to safety in Florence and prepared to defend Forli herself. She became the symbol of Italian resistance to the Borgias. She personally led the defense of the Rocca di Ravaldino, the same fortress she had held years before. The siege was intense. Borgia's cannons pounded the walls, but Caterina's garrison held out for weeks. She was a constant presence on the walls, directing the defense and encouraging her men. In the end, the fortress fell to a brutal assault. Caterina fought until the very last moment when she was captured. She was taken to Rome as a prize. Even in defeat, she was defiant. Caterina Sforza's life was a testament to her will. She was a woman who was expected to be a pawn in the games of men. Instead, she became a player in her own right. She turned the weakness of a mother's love into a terrifying weapon of defiance, and the weakness of a female regent into a symbol of unyielding resistance. Number 6, could a barbarian queen build an empire on Roman ruins? Zenobia ruled the city of Palmyra in the 3rd century AD. While slightly before the traditional medieval period, her story fits the mold of a queen who defied expectations. Palmyra was a wealthy oasis city in the Syrian desert, a client state on the eastern edge of the Roman Empire. It grew rich from the trade routes that passed through it. Zenobia was the wife of the city's ruler, Odenathus. He was a loyal ally of Rome, so loyal that Rome gave him the title Corrector of the Whole East after he defeated the Persian Sasanian Empire. In 267, Odenathus and his eldest son were assassinated. His son from his marriage to Zenobia of Abalathus was just a child. Zenobia took power as regent. Her weakness was her position. She was a woman, a regent for a boy, and the ruler of a client state. But Rome expected her to be a compliant placeholder, to maintain Palmyra's loyalty and keep the trade routes open. The new emperor Aurelian had major problems to deal with in the West and did not pay her much attention. This was his mistake. Zenobia was not a placeholder. She was brilliant, educated, and ambitious. She claimed descent from Cleopatra. She was not content to be a Roman puppet. She saw the Roman Empire in a state of crisis, beset by internal rebellions and barbarian invasions. She saw an opportunity. She began to expand her power, but she did it cleverly. At first, she maintained the pretense of loyalty to Rome. As coins minted in Palmyra showed her son on one side and the Roman emperor on the other. But while the coins showed respect, her armies were on the move. She was not using her weakness as a regent to simply survive. She was using it as a cover for imperial expansion. Rome was distracted, and who would suspect a mere regent of having such grand ambitions? In 270, she launched a full-scale invasion of the Roman province of Arabia. And then she conquered Egypt, the breadbasket of the Roman Empire. This was a direct and stunning challenge to Roman authority. She had seized one of Rome's most valuable provinces. From her capital in Palmyra, Zenobia now controlled a vast territory stretching from modern-day Turkey to Egypt. She had created the Palmyrene Empire. She was a tolerant and effective ruler. Her court was a center of learning, attracting scholars and philosophers. She managed a diverse empire of Syrians, Arabs, Egyptians, and Greeks. She was creating a viable alternative to Roman rule in the East. By 271, she felt strong enough to drop the pretense. She declared her son Augustus, and herself Augusta, titles reserved for the Roman emperor and his family. This was a formal declaration of independence. She had used the chaos within the Roman Empire and the low expectations of her as a female regent to carve out her own empire. But she had overplayed her hand. The Emperor Aurelian had finally stabilized the western part of the empire. He He was a tough and experienced soldier, and he now turned his full attention to the east. He was not going to tolerate an independent empire on his border. In 272, Aurelian marched east. He was a brilliant general, and his legions were the best fighting force in the world. He defeated Zenobia's armies in two major battles. Zenobia retreated to Palmyra, which Aurelian then besieged. The city was strong, but it could not hold out forever. Zenobia tried to escape to Persia to seek an alliance, but she was captured by Roman cavalry near the Euphrates River. Her empire collapsed. Aurelian spared Palmyra at first, but when it rebelled again, he returned and sacked the city, destroying it. Zenobia's fate is a matter of debate. One story says she was paraded through the streets of Rome in golden chains during Aurelian's triumph. Another says she died on the way to Rome. A third, more favorable account suggests she was treated well, married a Roman senator, and lived out her life in a villa near Tivoli. Regardless of her end, Zenobia's achievement was extraordinary. For a few short years, she ruled an empire that challenged the might of Rome. She exploited the weakness of her position to achieve a level of power no one thought possible. She was a regent who became an empress, a client queen who became a conqueror. Number 5, how do you unite 3 warring kingdoms with diplomacy instead of a sword? Margaret I of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden was born in 1353. She was the daughter of the King of Denmark. At the age of 10, she was married to the King of Norway. Her son, Olaf, was named heir to both kingdoms. But her father died without a male heir, and Olaf was elected King of Denmark as well. Since Olaf was a child, Margaret ruled as regent. Then, when Olaf died suddenly at the age of 17, Margaret was left in a precarious position. Her weakness was that she had no direct claim to any of the thrones. She was a woman, and she was a ruler by proxy first for her son, and then with no direct heir at all. The powerful nobles of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden could have easily pushed her aside and elected their own kings. The 3 Scandinavian kingdoms were often at war with each other. The idea of a single woman ruling all of them seemed impossible. Margaret did not seek power through force. She used her intelligence, her patience, and her supreme diplomatic skill. She understood that the nobles were the key to power. Instead of confronting them, she co-opted them. She did not claim the title of queen. Instead, she had herself named all-powerful lady and regent of the kingdoms. It was a subtle but important distinction. It soothed the egos of the nobles who were wary of a female monarch. Her first step was to secure her position in Denmark and Norway. She did this by adopting her young grandnephew Eric of Pomerania and naming him as her heir. This gave the kingdoms a future king to rally around, while leaving Margaret in effective control as regent. Her next target was Sweden. Sweden was in a state of civil war ruled by an unpopular German king, Albert of Mecklenburg. The Swedish nobles were desperate. They approached Margaret, the powerful regent of Denmark and Norway, and asked for her help. They offered her the crown of Sweden. This was her chance. She raised an army and defeated King Albert in 1389. She was now the de facto ruler of all 3 Scandinavian kingdoms, but she knew that a union forged by conquest would not last. It had to be a union built on consent and mutual benefit. She spent the next 8 years working on her masterpiece, the Kalmar Union. This was not a quick process. It involved endless negotiations with the councils of nobles from all 3 kingdoms. She had to balance their competing interests, their ancient rivalries, and their deep-seated suspicions of each other. Her weakness as a woman became her strength in these negotiations. The male nobles and kings of the age often settled disputes through war. It was a matter of honor and pride. Margaret operated differently. She was patient. She listened. She persuaded. She used her vast personal wealth to buy loyalty. She used her legal and administrative skills to create a framework that all 3 kingdoms could accept. In 1397, she summoned the leading nobles from Denmark, Norway, and Sweden to the Swedish city of Kalmar. There, her heir, Eric of Pomerania, was crowned king of all 3 kingdoms. The treaty they signed, the Union of Kalmar, united Scandinavia under a single monarch. It was a personal union, with each kingdom officially keeping its own laws and councils, but all foreign policy and defense were to be handled by the one king. And everyone knew who was really in charge. Although Eric was the crowned king, Margaret was the undisputed ruler until her death in 1412. She was the architect and the engine of the union. She centralized the administration, reformed the currency, and reclaimed crown lands that had been lost to the nobility. She was a powerful and effective ruler, but she always did it from behind the scenes, using the title of regent and ruling in her nephew's name. Margaret, I used her perceived weaknesses, her indirect claim to power, and her gender to her absolute advantage. It forced her to use diplomacy, consensus building, and political maneuvering instead of brute force. The result was not just a personal victory, but the creation of the largest state in 15th century Europe, a union that would last in one form or another for over 100 years. Number 4, must a queen choose between her crown and her son? Tamar of Georgia ruled during the nation's golden age in the late 12th and early 13th centuries. Her father, King George III, named her as his co-ruler and heir. When he died in 1184, she became the first woman to rule Georgia in her own right. The Georgian nobility, like nobles everywhere, was reluctant to accept a female monarch. They forced her to dismiss her father's appointed officials and also insisted she take a husband. The nobles chose a husband for her, Yuri Bogolyubsky, a Russ's prince. They thought he would be a strong military leader and that Tamar would be relegated to a background role. This was Tamar's weakness. She was a young, unmarried queen, and her powerful vassals were trying to control her through the man they chose for her to marry. The marriage was a disaster. Yuri was a drunkard and a brute. He was also a poor soldier. After 2 years, Tamar had had enough. In a move of incredible boldness for the time, she divorced him and exiled him from the kingdom. This was a direct challenge to the nobles who had chosen him. She then chose her own husband, David Soslan, an Alan prince. He was a skilled military commander, but Tamar made it clear that he was her consort, not her co-ruler. She remained the absolute monarch. The spurned Yuri was not finished. He gathered an army of discontented nobles and invaded Georgia, trying to reclaim the throne. This was the greatest test of Tamar's reign. The country was split in a civil war. Many of the powerful lords who had once supported her now sided with her ex-husband. They saw this as their chance to depose the queen they had never truly wanted. Tamar did not hide in her palace. She became a warrior queen. She addressed her troops personally before battle, inspiring them with her courage and her faith. She took an active role in planning the military campaigns. Her loyal armies, led by her husband David Soslan and other brilliant generals, met the rebels in battle and defeated them. Yuri was captured and, in an act of mercy, was pardoned and exiled again. When he tried to invade a second time, he was defeated for good. Tamar had faced down her own nobles and her ex-husband and had won. She had consolidated her power. With her domestic enemies defeated, she turned her attention outward. Her reign marked the peak of Georgia's military and cultural power. She used her weakness, the initial need to accept a husband chosen by her nobles, as a crucible that forged her into a stronger ruler. By defying them, divorcing Yuri, and defeating him in battle, she broke the power of the factious nobility. She had proven that she was not a puppet. She was the true ruler of Georgia. Under Tamar the Great, as she came to be known, the kingdom of Georgia expanded its influence across the Caucasus. Her armies won a series of stunning victories against neighboring Muslim states. She was a great patron of the arts, literature, and architecture. Churches and monasteries were built across the land. The epic poem The Knight in the Panther's Skin was written during her reign. She was given the title King of Kings and Queen of Queens. Note the use of the word king. Like Jadwiga of Poland, she was often referred to in the masculine form Mepe to denote her status as a monarch in her own right. She had so thoroughly dominated the political and military scene that her gender became irrelevant. She was not a great female ruler, she was a great ruler, period. Number 3. Could a queen's greatest legacy be the son? She trained to be a saint? Joanna I of Naples was one of the most controversial figures of the 14th century. She became Queen of Naples at the age of 16 in 1343. Her reign was plagued by intrigue, war, and scandal from the very beginning. Her grandfather, King Robert the Wise, had named her as his heir, but he also arranged for her to marry her cousin Andrew of Hungary. The Hungarian royal house believed that Andrew should be king, not just the queen's husband. This was Joanna's weakness. She was a young queen with a husband who had a competing and powerful claim to her throne, backed by the might of the Kingdom of Hungary. Andrew was arrogant and openly contemptuous of his wife's authority. The Neapolitan court was split into factions. The situation was a powder keg. In 1345, the powder keg exploded. Andrew was assassinated. He was thrown from a balcony in a palace where he and Joanna were staying. Joanna was immediately accused of having orchestrated the murder. Her guilt or innocence has been debated by historians for centuries. But at the time, the accusation was devastating. Andrew's brother, King Louis I of Hungary, swore revenge. He used his brother's murder as a pretext to invade Naples and claim the kingdom for himself. Joanna was now facing a massive foreign invasion led by a king who was determined to depose her. She was a young woman, barely out of her teens, accused of a terrible crime, and at war with one of Europe's most powerful monarchs. Everyone expected her to collapse. Joanna fled. She went to Avignon, the seat of the papacy at the time. Naples was a papal fief, meaning the Pope was its ultimate overlord. Joanna went to plead her case before the Pope himself. This was a bold and brilliant move. She was using her supposed weakness, her status as a woman accused of a heinous crime, to seek justice from the highest authority in Christendom. In Avignon, she put on a masterful performance. She defended herself in a papal court. She argued her case with such eloquence and intelligence that the Pope Clement Zero was convinced. He declared her innocent of the murder. To further solidify his support, Joanna sold the city of Avignon to the papacy for a very low price. It was a clever piece of political bribery. With the Pope's backing, her position was much stronger. She returned to Naples and began the long fight to win back her kingdom. King Louis of Hungary's invasion had stalled. His army was ravaged by the Black Death, which was sweeping through Italy. He was forced to withdraw. Joanna, through a combination of diplomacy, papal support, and sheer luck, was able to re-establish her rule. For the next 30 years, Joanna ruled Naples. Her reign was a constant struggle. She had to deal with rebellious barons, mercenary companies, and the complex politics of Italy. She married 3 more times, always choosing husbands who would not challenge her own authority. She was a great patron of the arts and culture. Naples became a center of Renaissance learning under her rule. But the shadow of her first husband's murder and the enmity of the Hungarian king never fully went away. In the end, it was another pope who brought about her downfall. During the Great Western Schism, when 2 rival popes claimed authority, Joanna backed the pope in Avignon. The pope in Rome, Urban VI, excommunicated her. He declared her deposed and offered her kingdom to her cousin Charles of Durazzo, who happened to be a protege of the King of Hungary. Charles invaded Naples in 1381. This time Joanna had nowhere to run. She was captured, imprisoned, and eventually murdered, likely strangled in her cell. Joanna's story is complex. She was not a simple hero, but she was a survivor. For nearly 4 decades, she held onto her throne against incredible odds. She used the papal court to turn the greatest accusation against her into a declaration of her innocence. She dominated the treacherous world of Italian politics for a generation, only to be brought down by the same papal politics she had once used so effectively. Number 2, could a queen hold power by being the perfect mother and the perfect widow? Isabella I of Castile is famous for uniting Spain with her husband Ferdinand of Aragon and for sponsoring the voyage of Christopher Columbus. But before she could do any of that, she had to win a civil war to claim her own crown. She was born in 1451. Her half-brother, Henry IV, was the King of Castile. His reign was a disaster. The nobles were rebellious, and the kingdom was in chaos. The biggest problem was the question of the succession. The king's only child, a daughter named Juana, was widely believed to be illegitimate. She was known as Juana la Beltraneja, suggesting her real father was a courtier named Beltran de la Cueva. This created an opportunity for Isabella The nobles who opposed King Henry rallied around Isabella and her younger brother Alfonso. When Alfonso died suddenly, the 17-year-old Isabella became the focus of the opposition. Her weakness was her claim. While many believed Juana was illegitimate, Isabella was still only the king's half-sister. A powerful faction of the nobility and the neighboring kingdom of Portugal supported Juana's claim. King Henry wanted to control Isabella by marrying her off to one of his allies. He tried to marry her to the much older king of Portugal. Isabella refused. She knew that her marriage was her most powerful political weapon. She had to choose a husband who would strengthen her claim, not make her a pawn. Behind her brother's back, she arranged her own marriage to Ferdinand, the heir to the kingdom of Aragon. This was an incredibly risky move. When King Henry found out, he was furious and disowned her, but the marriage was a masterstroke. It united the two largest Christian kingdoms in Spain. It created a powerful bloc that could stand against the supporters of Juana. When Henry IV died in 1474, Isabella immediately had herself proclaimed Queen of Castile. She did not wait for Ferdinand. This was a crucial act. It made it clear that she was the ruler of Castile in her own right, not just the wife of the King of Aragon. When Ferdinand arrived, he was angry that she had acted without him. They argued, but they eventually agreed on a motto for their joint rule: Tanto monta, monta tanto, Isabel como Fernando. The one is as good as the other, Isabella as much as Ferdinand. But her crown was not secure. The King of Portugal, who was betrothed to the young Juana, invaded Castile to press her claim. The War of the Castilian Succession began. This was Isabella's trial by fire. The weakness of her disputed claim forced her to be a more active and visible ruler than any queen before her. She could not afford to sit in a palace. She had to win the loyalty of her people. She was constantly on the move, traveling the kingdom on horseback, even while pregnant. She was a brilliant administrator. She reorganized the army, streamlined the collection of taxes, and personally presided over court cases to dispense justice. She was showing her subjects that she could provide the strong, stable rule that her brother never had. She also used her piety as a political tool. She presented herself as a devout, moral ruler, chosen by God to restore order to the troubled kingdom. This contrasted sharply with the scandalous reputation of her brother's court and the questionable legitimacy of her rival, Juana. While Ferdinand was the main military commander, Isabella was the logistical genius of the war. She was in charge of supplies, recruitment, and finance. She famously sold her own jewels to help pay for the war effort. She was everywhere, doing everything. The people of Castile saw a queen who was working tirelessly for them. After 5 years of war, Isabella and Ferdinand were victorious. The Portuguese were defeated, and Juana was sent to a convent. Isabella's claim was secure. She had won her crown not through birthright alone, but through her own effort, intelligence, and force of will. The rest of her reign is famous: the completion of the Reconquista with the conquest of Granada, the expulsion of the Jews, the sponsorship of Columbus. But all of that was only possible because she first dominated her enemies in a civil war. She took a weak claim and made it absolute through her personal leadership, turning the very act of fighting for her crown into the proof that she deserved to wear it. Number 1. What if your greatest strength was the vow you made to your dying husband? And Eleanor of Aquitaine was one of the most powerful and influential figures of the Middle Ages. She was born around 1122. At the age of 15, she became the Duchess of Aquitaine in her own right, inheriting a vast and wealthy territory that was larger and richer than the lands controlled by the King of France. Her weakness was also her strength. Her inheritance made her the most desirable bride in Europe. It also made her a political prize to be controlled. She first married Louis VII, the King of France. She was a vibrant, worldly, and intelligent woman. He was a pious, monkish man. The marriage was a poor match. She accompanied him on the Second Crusade, a disastrous military campaign. There were rumors of her scandalous behavior. After 15 years and only 2 daughters, the marriage was annulled. 2 months later, Eleanor did something shocking. She married Henry of Anjou, a man who was 10 years younger than her, and the great rival of her ex-husband. 2 years later, he became King Henry II of England. Eleanor was now the Queen of England. Her lands, combined with Henry's, created the Angevin Empire, a massive territory that stretched from the borders of Scotland to the Pyrenees. For the first decade of their marriage, they were a power couple. They had 8 children, including 5 sons. Eleanor was an active ruler, frequently governing England as regent when Henry was on the continent. But Henry was a domineering and unfaithful husband. As their sons grew up, the tension in the family exploded. Eleanor's sons were ambitious and impatient. They wanted power and land of their own, but Henry was reluctant to give it to them. In 1173, Eleanor made a fateful decision. She supported her sons in a rebellion against their father. The Great Revolt, as it was called, was a massive, widespread rebellion. It was a son's war against a father, but behind it all was Eleanor. Why did she do it? Was it for her son's ambitions? Or was it revenge against a husband who had sidelined her and publicly flaunted his mistresses? Whatever the reason, it was a massive gamble. The revolt failed. Henry II defeated his sons and their allies, and he punished his wife severely. For the next 16 years, Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful women in the world, was a prisoner. She was moved from castle to castle in England, kept under house arrest by her own husband. This was her greatest weakness, that she was stripped of her power, her freedom, and her children. Most people would have been broken, but Eleanor waited. She outlived her husband. When Henry II died in 1189, their son, Richard the Lionheart, became king. His first act was to free his mother. Eleanor was now in her late 60s, an age when most people were long retired or dead. For Eleanor, her career was just beginning its most impressive chapter. Richard the Lionheart had little interest in ruling England. He wanted to go on crusade. He left the kingdom in the hands of his mother. Eleanor, the former prisoner, was now the effective ruler of the Angevin Empire. She governed with wisdom and authority. She was not just a regent, she was a queen in all but name. When Richard was captured and held for ransom on his way back from the crusade, it was Eleanor who raised the enormous sum of money needed to free him. She traveled across Germany in the dead of winter, when she was over 70 years old, to deliver the ransom in person and bring her son home. After Richard's death, her youngest son, John, became king. John was a disastrous ruler. He lost most of the family's lands in France to the French king, Philip Augustus, who was the son of Eleanor's first husband. Even in her old age, Eleanor was still fighting to hold the empire together. When she was nearly 80 years old, she was besieged in a castle by her own grandson, Arthur of Brittany, who had allied with the French king. She held out until her son John's army arrived to rescue her. Eleanor of Aquitaine lived until she was 82. She had been a duchess, a queen of France, and a queen of England. She had outlived 6 of her 10 children. She had been a crusader, a rebel, a prisoner, and a ruler. She turned the weakness of her imprisonment into a period of waiting, a long game that she won. She emerged from her captivity more powerful and more respected than ever before. She dominated the 12th century not just through her lands or her marriages, but through her incredible resilience and her unshakable will to power.